Hi, I'm Larissa MacFarquhar. This is Adam Lowry, Marianne Cusato, and Dan Barber. And they're a chef, a housing designer, and a chemical engineer. And I, too, wondered what they were doing on a panel together when I first saw the names last week. But in talking to them, I realized that they actually do have something in common, thank goodness, which is they're all part of a new generation of environmental entrepreneurs that believes that bland, unappetizing, 70s-style green products have no future besides hippies and the self-righteous. And they think that in order to have a real impact on the way people consume, products have to look beautiful, taste fantastic, smell irresistible, whatever it might be, and in general appeal as much to our instincts as to our conscience. So no more scolding. We have to stop trying to change consumers and start trying to change the products. And I'm not going to, because their work is, despite this thing in common, so different, I'm not going to have a conversation with all three at once. We're just going to talk about each person's work in turn. Starting with Dan Barber, who's the chef of Blue Hill Restaurant on Washington Place here in Manhattan, and of Blue Hill at Stone Farms, a restaurant in Westchester that derives many of its ingredients, animal and vegetable, from its own working farm on the property. And he's known not only for his food, but for his passionate attention to where food comes from. He knows that what an animal is fed determines how good it is and how healthy it is to eat. And he knows that a carrot that travels 3,000 miles across the country to a supermarket may be cheaper, but it will taste very bland and carry a long-term cost to the environment. So many people associate sustainable agriculture and the use of local produce that you are engaged in with Alice Waters and Chez Panisse in the 70s. But you're actually quite different from her, are you not?
Yeah. Alice is... I guess I'm dirtier than Alice. Alice is squeaky clean. She looks like she's out of an Ivory soap commercial. And for good reason. She's brilliant. And I owe a lot of my career to people like Alice. Alice specifically, I used to work for Alice Waters at Chez Panisse, so I don't say anything pejoratively about her because she usually hears about it anyway. So I keep it positive, and I feel very positive about her. But in fairness, I think that she represents a side of this movement and the purists among her who become informed about agriculture and about food by looking to the past. In fact, the further back, the better for a lot of these purists. And while I think that's instructive, I've tried to embrace innovation and modern thinking about food systems, actually farming specifically, and cooking, and to embrace old ideas, but to put them in a modern context. So, for example, you would walk into my kitchen and you would come across sous vide cooking for most of the kitchen. So that's cooking that's in plastic bags and at very gentle temperatures, and it looks a little bit like a laboratory. Except outside, you'll see some pictures behind me of what it might look like, which is very old school. So there's an old and a new melding together. There's also quite a bit of technology on the farm that feels techno-glitzy. We use something called a refractometer to measure scientifically the sugar, the Brix content, which is the sugars, the parts per billion of sugar in the soil, to know when to pick and when the fruits and vegetables are at their ripest. So in other words, technology innovation has a cold-hearted association. But I think there's a warm-hearted, paradoxical conclusion, which is that we can use technology, embrace technology, to be more environmentally sensitive, to have healthier food, and to have food taste better, which is where I'm most concerned.
And why, it sounds very nice to have your food come straight to the table, but why does it taste better?
Why does local food taste better? I think local food tastes better first because it's not traveling as far, and so the farmer's allowed to keep the fruit or vegetable on the vine or in the dirt longer. So, what it's fed is fed better and longer, and so there's sort of a very straightforward answer to that. Generally, when food comes from further away, it's grown in a less diverse ecology. So kind of out west, it tends to be grown in monocultures, which is to say there's an efficiency to growing that carrot in 50 acres of carrots instead of a carrot that's grown among other types of carrots and among a diverse planting strategy, which is more common locally, and what farmers markets generally support. So monocultures, in some ways, is sort of the original sin of all this stuff, because it requires for food to be grown in one variety and at great expanse. It's sort of exquisitely vulnerable to pests, and it requires inputs, chemical usually, pesticides and whatnot, all kinds of things we don't want to be eating nor really thinking about when we think about food. So local food, in most cases, you're supporting a diverse ecology, and an ecology that is a lot more beneficial to the environment and generally more healthy and again, more tasteful. So that's one part of it. And then the other part of it, which I think is equally convincing, is that there's a story attached to the food when you buy locally. There's a kind of a narrative, because to buy locally, you're often you're almost always cutting out the middleman or the middle woman. And so in this case, you're buying at the farmer's market, and you're having an actual exchange with the person who grew your food. And I think that generally leads to better tasting food. So I'll give a quick example here. I mean, you're overlooking the outdoor production fields at Stone Barns, which is 25 miles north of here. And in this very field, actually, right where I'm sitting, is where we grow the garlic. And we grow this kind of garlic called a curry garlic, right? And there's a quick story about it, and it's from a town in southern Italy that this family actually created the variety through crossbreeding garlic seeds. It's hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And the great-great-great-great-grandson of the original person who created this variety of garlic came to Stone Barns. His grandfather immigrated to the United States, took the garlic with him. In this particular region of Italy, this garlic was very famous. And the edict among the family was that it would only be passed along to the family. If anyone was going to have the garlic, they had to have it crushed, or they had to have it in tomato sauce. So nobody else could grow this garlic anywhere else in the world. The grandfather immigrated to this country and kept the tradition going. His son, and now the grandson, felt too much pressure about growing the garlic. He was in the upper Hudson Valley, didn't want to be doing it anymore, felt the crush of generations of famous curry garlic, and handed the seeds to us, to our farmer. Got to know him, respected him, and handed the seeds and said, can you just respect my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather's wish, which is to not pass along the seed unless it's in sauce or crushed, and you'll be the only people growing this garlic. Okay, so I cook with this. I have the honor and the pleasure of cooking with this garlic, but we tell this story to people who are eating garlic that in a dish that I prepare, and it is it's delicious garlic. There's no question about it, but it is the best thing anyone's ever tasted, because they're not tasting just the garlic. They're tasting mother and father and tradition and respect. They're tasting Italy, which of course always tastes better. Just look at Mario Batali. So it creates these dimensions of flavors that I can't provide. So I try and tell this story all the time, in part because I want to look better.
And last thing I'd ask is about cost. Obviously, right now, locally grown organic produce costs a lot more. Do you think that will always be the case?
Do I think it'll always be the case? I think locally, organically grown food reflects the real cost of growing food. So do I think that it will always be this way? I mean, to a certain extent, I kind of hope it does. And I don't want to sound elitist saying that. But of course, I am elitist, but I don't want to sound that way. But I try and make the argument that the real cost of food is not reflected at the checkout aisle, right? Is that there's all these hidden costs that we all pay for. So it's not a question of are we going to pay more for food? It's a question of how are we going to pay for it? Are we going to pay for it in the environmental degradation that bad food raised in monocultures afflicts this country? Are we going to pay for it in our healthcare costs? I said to you in an earlier conversation, I just last week read this stunning statistic, which is that 20 years ago, 1984, a little over 20 years ago, we were paying 8% of our disposable income, 8% of our disposable income on healthcare, and about 15.8% of our disposable income on food. That was in 1984. Today, we're spending nearly 16% of our disposable income on healthcare and just under 8% on food. Those numbers have exactly reversed in just over 20 years. And one begins to wonder, if we paid a little bit more for our food, in other words, if we paid a little bit closer to the real costs of growing our food, would we be demonstratively more healthy? And happier, I can definitely argue that, but healthier too. And then the cost to the environment, cost to our society, our rural, heart of America has been devastated over the last 30 years. And then there's these political ramifications. I also said that I read this another stunning report a few months ago from the Schwarzenegger administration in California. His administration predicts that by the end of this century, the Salinas Valley of California will be wall-to-wall development. Now, that's written in the 5-page report. It's just buried in there. Wall-to-wall development. It took my breath away. For those of you who don't know, the Salinas Valley right now is wall-to-wall farms. And we, east of the Mississippi, probably get 60% of our food from the Salinas Valley, especially during the winter. And so one begins to wonder, what does the end of the century look like for eating? If the Salinas Valley is no longer going to be growing food, we're still going to be eating, I think. So we're going to be getting our food from somewhere, and it's probably going to be further and further away. And it conjures up all these sort of, to me, frightening images. What realities, which is what happens when we lose control of our food supply. We've seen what's happened when we lose control of our energy supply. We're fighting a war right now. Can we imagine, and do we want to be in a position, do we want to leave our children and our grandchildren in a position where we can't feed ourselves? So do I think that the local food and sustainable food is a bit more expensive than our cheap food? Yes, at the checkout aisle it should be. And I think that if it's not, we're going to be paying for it on the back end somehow.
Thank you. Marianne Cusato is best known now for designing the Katrina Cottage, which is a sturdier and more dignified alternative to the FEMA trailers that are used to house victims of natural disasters. It's a tiny, freestanding, permanent house that comes in a kit and can be put together very quickly. And although it was originally designed for Katrina victims, it's turned out to be extremely popular for other purposes, for a guest house, for an elderly parent, for an affordable home. And Cusato is going to market them through Lowe's. And she's not just recommending tiny spaces to other people. She herself lives in a 300-square-foot apartment in the Village, so she knows what she's talking about. So if you could just describe to us, I mean, we have pictures back here, but what is a Katrina Cottage? How big is it? How does one put it together? How much does it cost?
The Katrina Cottage, it started as an idea for disaster housing right after Hurricane Katrina. Governor Barber had invited a group of architects and planners down to the Mississippi coast to create ideas and alternatives that addressed short-term and immediate needs while they balanced the long-term needs of the coast, because it was something that they were very worried about. You can build very quickly and get something just up, but what is the long-term implication of that? And at the same time, you can spend all your time thinking about the long-term implication and miss the needs of today. So it's a balancing act between the two of finding this right mix between something that is viable at now and helps the communities in the future. And so that was the design challenge, to come up with this alternative to the FEMA trailer, because unfortunately with the infrastructure that was lost, what we were calling temporary housing wasn't temporary. It was actually something that people would be in for not just months, but even years. And, already it's a year and a half later, and almost 2 years, they've just extended the FEMA trailers another 18 months. So, it really proves the point is that we needed to come up with something that was more durable, that was safer, that was affordable, could be built quickly. But wasn't just that, it actually extended further than shelter and was something that people were proud to live in. So that was the kernel of the idea. From that point, it really has evolved well beyond the disaster housing. It started with 300-square-foot prototype, but now we have a series of designs that go up to 1,200 square feet as the base of the plans, and then they're actually designed to grow beyond that, some of them even up to 1,800 square feet. The idea being that you can build what you can afford to build at the time, but you know how the building grows, which is how we used to build traditionally. We would start with a small part of the house, and then we would build onto it as your family grew, as your bank account grew, all of these things that we used to do, we were trying to, we were reintroducing. So the interesting thing about the cottage was we're not trying to do anything new, but it's so revolutionary because no one's actually doing it. It's a quite odd combination. And what we found was this attempting to do this for disaster housing applied actually to the rest of the market nationwide. We actually think in the end the disaster market will be our smallest market, because the formula that we came up with for these designs that are safe, they're affordable, they look nice, they can be built quickly, and they really people can identify with it, is something that we've had, backyards for elderly parents. We've had people that want them as starter housing. We've got people that actually just want a vacation in them, because it's something that even though it was designed for the coast of Mississippi, is a style, because they're so simple, that can be very easily adapted nationwide, and can be things that people actually can say, well, we actually have a building. From just about every region, I've had somebody come up to me and say, there's a building that looks just like this down the street, and it's our favorite building. And that's what people are really responding to, the love of the place, and they identify with how it feels. And it's interesting, the three of us on this panel, it is amazing, the core, the very similar things that we have to present. I mean, the idea of the food being local and being something that people can identify with. And in terms of the buildings, with the Katrina Cottage, actually it's very parallel of things that people can, even though it's a national design, it's also something that can be very easily tweaked and put locally, and that people can feel proud of that, and really enhances the community beyond just simple buildings, which is where the building industry has gone.
And relating to the importance of people liking those houses, you said that your houses are not technically green, but that they are sustainable for other reasons?
Exactly.
Because of that?
We are using a lot of green materials. To be officially green, you have to sort of go through a lengthy process of sort of a checklist of things. We are using a lot of green materials, but we actually think that green building goes deeper than the materials and a checklist. And it's building a building that people love, so over time they'll maintain it, and that they won't want to tear it down. Because a friend of mine has a quote that says, the best way to recycle a 2x4 is to keep it in place. That our landfills are actually filled with building waste and all of these things that we throw away. But really what we need to do is build places that we love and want to maintain and want to take care of and want to invest ourselves in, because those are the places that over time will be the most sustainable and will be the places that people identify with and care about the most, and it makes it the greenest.
Yeah, you said that it was only diapers fill.
Yeah, exactly.
Landfills more.
The landfills are completely filled up with waste from the the house building industry. And we look at we talk about cars and what they're doing to the environment, but actually what the house building industry and developers are doing to the environment is far worse, because we're not building places that people love. We're building places that are not sustainable in terms of the requirement of the car to get from place to place. And if we built smaller, compact communities that didn't require you to get in a car or get on the freeway to get a newspaper or a cup of coffee, the impact to the environment would be much less. And so that, something, the car isn't the problem. It's the miles traveled in the car that is the issue, and that is created by the industry that's building where we live, not the car industry. And if we can shift over and actually look at the places that we're driving the cars instead of the actual car itself, we could have a much nicer physical environment as well as just the sustainability of the environment we're building.
So we talked a little bit about this. I mean, you've been called a new urbanist, and you're alluding to the importance of ways of building that we've stopped paying attention to, like mixed use. If you could just explain a little bit more about what's happened in the 50 years since kit houses last were popular.
Yeah, the idea of how we build now is very segregated. You have your apartment complex, you have your the strip malls, you have the office park, you have your school complex, you have all of these pieces that are completely separate in most new development. They're connected by giant collector roads. To get from one to the other, it requires you going on these major arteries, instead of the old, more fine-grained way of building, which actually was a network of streets with a mix of uses. So you would not be required to get on the freeway. You wouldn't have a single route. You'd actually have several routes. What's interesting is that actually, I mean, it's very interesting to see all the different mathematical analysis that we've seen today. But actually, if you look at the distance sort of mathematically of these collector roads and the network of streets, if you have a smaller grain one, it's actually much easier to move more cars on more narrow roads than fewer wide roads. And so we see congestion, we think, okay, well, let's just add a few more lanes to the freeway, and we think that that's going to solve congestion issues, when actually it's, instead of just making the existing roads wider, we need to have smaller roads connecting. And what that does is it enhances the quality of life. You have streets that are designed for cars and people as opposed to just cars. So you're not giving up the car, you're just giving the option back to the person. And what we do right now is we really only design for the automobile. And what that does is it limits the use of basically half of the population. Half of our population is either too young or too old to drive. But to get anywhere, you're still required to get in a car. And most of the country doesn't have mass transit, which means we have households that require 2, 3, 4 cars to function, just to get the daily needs, just to get to school, just to get to work, just to go to the grocery store. And all of those cars are on the road. If we had connected streets where you weren't required to get in a car for every use, where your kids could actually walk to school again, or you could walk to the corner store where people could walk to their jobs, that's going to just release some of the pressure off of people financially. They're not going to have to maintain as many cars, so they can put that money back into their house. They can put, we've got so many financial issues right now because everybody's in debt because we have all of these things that are required just to live our daily lives. But if you could, so much of that actually just relates to the infrastructure of the environment that we've created. And if we look back at some of the really nice old towns and old communities throughout the U.S., you see this pattern there. These are the nicest areas, the most expensive areas in most cities and most towns. And what works with them is that they have nicely framed spaces, that a mix of uses, and also a mix of incomes.
Thank you. Adam Lowry's background is in chemical engineering, and he used to work at the Carnegie Institute as a climate scientist. And then in 2000, he founded a company called Method, which manufactures household cleaning products that are environmentally responsible and also very physically appealing. If you look at them online, their dish soap looks like perfume, and their mop looks like a halogen lamp. It's amazing. And it's now the 7th fastest growing company in America. So why did you leave the public sector and go into business?
Well, I think it's probably important to kind of define what I was doing in the public sector. I mean, who here has seen Inconvenient Truth? Probably a few. Yeah, good for you. The short answer is I basically made charts a lot like the charts that Al presented in Inconvenient Truth, and that was what I did. And I was passionately and deeply involved in the science that I was doing there. Loved what the subject matter was, but I started to grow disenchanted with the reach of the work over time. What I started to realize is that in some ways I was kind of preaching to the converted. I was working in this context about 10 years ago and working on climate science and how people were affecting the environment. And it was really, really important to a very, very small number of people. And to the everyday people that I actually thought were the people that needed to change in order to create environmental good, it was completely obscure. And then the second thing was really that the work there, we really separated ecology from economics. And I felt like our environmental problems are such complex problems that they require a complex framework within which to solve those problems. And so you couldn't separate ecology and economy. You actually had to align their incentives. And so I started looking at business as a way of doing that. And, business traditionally, those incentives are misaligned. What's good for the environment is bad for the business and vice versa. But it doesn't need to be that way. So when we started Method, we really embarked on the mission trying to redesign business itself and have Method be an example of that.
And why household cleaning products?
That one's pretty simple. It's the biggest and probably one of the nastiest categories out there. And because you have the average American home has 13 cleaning products in it, there's a very direct connection to your health inside your home. And we felt like if we could make a difference in those categories, we could make a difference in people's lives.
And there have been green products around for 30 years, obviously. And what were some of the things you wanted to change with Method. There's the halogen lamp type mop.
There it is, yeah. Well, you're right. And what I really felt like is the traditional approach to green products it just doesn't work, let's face it. And the reason it doesn't work is because the consumer proposition is one of sacrifice. It says the earth is dying and you need to save it, so buy this product even though it costs more, doesn't really work, it's more expensive, it's ugly and you have to hide it under your sink, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we just felt like that was a lot to ask of people, especially when you're buying bathroom cleaner. And so with Method, what we really try to do is we really focus on total quality. And green is absolutely an aspect of total quality. But so are some other things, and we bring those other things. The first is performance. A green cleaning product that doesn't work isn't going to do anybody any good and isn't going to create any change in any marketplace. And it's only going to appeal to the 3% of Americans that were like me when I started the business that said, I will make that sacrifice and use that extra elbow grease. The second thing we bring is beautiful design, and you mentioned that, and there's some photos behind me. But design is emotional, it's perceptual, it's immediate, and it creates an emotional connection with our products. And let's not forget that our homes are very emotional places. But traditionally, the products we use to care for our homes are ugly and toxic, and they're things we're ashamed of, and we hide them under the sink. And then we bring beautiful fragrance as well. People have been fragrancing their environments for thousands of years, yet the smell of clean is the smell of a hazardous chemical. And we think that actually we want to redefine what clean smells like to things that are more naturally smelling, like almond, like lavender, like pink grapefruit, some of the fragrances we bring in our products. And so at the end result is really what we're doing is we're satisfying both the emotional reasons why people buy their home care products as well as the rational reasons why they buy their products. Or kind of said another way, both the cerebral motivation in your brain and the more visceral emotion in your brain. And what that does is it creates relevance for a green product in that other 97%, the rest of us. That didn't grow up studying environmental science and worked at the Carnegie Institution, but just people that want to do the right thing but don't want to sacrifice while they're doing it. And so what I often say is what Method's doing is we're really bringing green to mainstream instead of trying to pull mainstream to green. I think you mentioned earlier it's not about changing the consumer, it's about changing the products. And we think if we can change the products, we'll bring those products to the mainstream and be a lot more successful. Mm-hmm. And it's probably one of the reasons why we are the 7th fastest growing company or privately held company in the U.S. And it's actually the thing I'm most proud of, because instead of preaching to the converted, little by little people are using Method, and they might have bought it because they loved the fragrance or the design was great, but they learn about the mission of the company a little bit, and they become loyal to it.
And one more quick question, which is, have you learned anything did it all work out as you imagined? Have you learned anything about green marketing?
Yeah, no business ever works out exactly how you how you imagined it. But the question was green marketing. Have we learned anything?
What have you learned about
I think it's an incredibly interesting time for marketing in general, especially in the green space, because green is kind of everywhere now. And I like to say Method was green before green was cool, and we've kind of got an interesting moment now. I think the two things we've probably learned that were most surprising is the role of dialogue and of authenticity in green marketing. What I mean by dialogue is we have an army of passionate consumers out there who have tried our products and realized they don't get a headache when they use them. They don't have to open up all the windows. Or maybe their child has asthma and they now finally actually can clean their house. And they write us passionate letters and they want to be involved in our brand. And we actually have named them. We call them People Against Dirty, and our mission is to fight dirty. And one of our strategies is really to arm them with the tools that they need to fight the fight against dirty. And so whether it's giving them samples that they can pass out to their friends, or information about the brand, or just letting them know the story about, where our roots are and why we're in business, and the fact that we measure ourselves according to different metrics, that we make our product 100% carbon neutrally. Things like this will help them become brand evangelists and then spread the word about our brand. And especially in the face of, especially with a boring, mundane cleaning product, the 30-second spot is certainly dead or dying. And so this becomes a much more effective vehicle. And then secondly, on the point of authenticity, I think this one's most interesting, and I think we're going to see this more and more. When people learn about the mission of our business and the fact that we do define ourselves differently and we're in business to change business, that's something that they really believe in, and will be something that they will then go out and tell other people about. And we're now living in a time where literally just in the last 18 months, companies that have been in business for 100 years in all different types of sectors that have never uttered a green word before are talking about their triple bottom line and how they're measuring this and measuring that, and how wonderful they've always been. And consumers meet that with a little bit of suspicion. And when they hear about the mission and the roots of our business, that authenticity, and we can tell that story to them, then that creates the ultimate loyalty in our brand. The irony, I think, in this is that marketing authenticity is inherently inauthentic. And so you have to find ways of telling your story without running an ad or placing some sort of paid media that says, we're the most authentic, because that's inherently not authentic. So I think really the rules of the game are changing, and we're going to see different media, we're going to see different tactics, we're going to see all sorts of different things to try to get the messages across that will separate the proverbial men from the boys in the green space.
Thank you very much. Thank you.